TCT was conceived over a weekend, over a six-pack of beer with colleagues of mine. The name transcatheter had never been used before in a meeting. I had come up with the name, having heard that name used by a colleague, Jim Locke, for pediatric purposes. It was a generic, interesting name to describe this new device technology era that we were about to embark upon. So with that name and with the idea that we had many new devices that needed to be circulated, we thought about putting together a boutique meeting, a relatively small meeting with aficionados to try to understand more about the status of and future directions of these new devices. This was done obviously on a shoestring. There are very few industry supporters. We had a faculty of about a dozen. It was in the basement of the Omni Showroom Hotel in Washington, D.C. We did most of the live cases out of Georgetown University. We felt that the critique of these new methodologies in the live case venue made perfect sense. And with minimal support and doing most of the work ourselves, we felt that this would be an exciting and energizing activity. We had no idea what to expect. We had some interesting new devices that we wanted to expose. It turned out that about 200 people showed up at the meeting, which was much more than we had expected. And it was a very exciting experience because everybody who showed up had a particular interest in the growth of this subspecialty. So it was a fairly eclectic meeting with many very high-level individuals, much like in the very early Grunze courses. The people who went to his courses in Zurich became the leaders in the subspecialty. I would say that the majority of people in the audience ultimately, either from industry or from academia, became leaders in interventional cardiology. TCT from the very beginning was an expression of innovation, of creation, of evolution, and we looked at only new devices.
To be honest, this is the first time I've used a high-torque standard wire.
And we looked in a very critical way, hopefully in an academic way and in a clinical way, how these devices might evolve, iterate, and impact clinical medicine. To a certain extent, I think TCT paralleled the growth of interventional cardiology. For the first 5 years, between 1988 and 1993, we progressively grew this niche, this boutique niche of new device angioplasty. So as stents began to grow, TCT grew with it in exploring what the dimensions of stent technology. As atherectomy, as a technique began to grow, TCT, I think, contributed to a better understanding and to the growth of that device procedure and its evolution as an interventional therapy. So in that new device angioplasty era, TCT began to really evolve and extend in this boutique fashion in a very iterative and arithmetic way. We saw growth every year and interest every year in this particular format. As we began TCT, it was truly a U.S. meeting, even though we had great international participation. After 5 years, we made a conscious decision. We said we want this to explode internationally, and we want to consider this as not just a boutique new device angioplasty meeting, but as a core meeting in interventional cardiovascular therapeutics.
What we're going to do now is go directly to Antonio Colombo in Milan, Italy.
So in 1993, we began international live case transmissions. First time that had ever been done in medicine, with several sites, notably in France, Toulouse, Antonio Colombo, in Milan, and Patrick Sarais in Rotterdam, some of the key sites in the world. And that created tremendous outside U.S. interest, and people began to see things that they had never seen before, which were many new devices that had not even come under the FDA horizons yet because they were available or being tested outside the United States. So that really generated what I think is an international explosion. And we built the content out and began to become very conscious of feeling that we had a responsibility that was more than just new device angioplasty, but a more generalizable responsibility to all of interventional cardiovascular medicine. It's a very interdisciplinary meeting. One of our prime objectives from the beginning was to explore the technical and clinical development of new devices. But by clinical development, it meant how can practitioners use these devices? So I think what practitioners saw was the future. They had a glimpse into the future, what would be available to them and what the limits of how devices could be used in their own clinical practice. So it was a great reflection, and at least I feel a great opportunity to be able to see not only what they're doing, but what they can begin to do, the limits of what they should do, and what the future would hold. At the beginning, the emergence of what we called a multi-device, lesion-specific approach to angioplasty was one of the innovative concepts that was an outgrowth of TCT, which is to recognize that not all lesions, not all patients are the same, and therefore the therapies need to be adjusted to some of those differentiating features of either a lesion or to a patient. So for instance, if a patient had a calcified lesion, they should be treated preferentially, perhaps, with rotational atherectomy. If they had a complex lesion with spontaneous dissection, clearly stents were the way to go. So we innovated the approach of using multiple devices to treat patients with complex coronary disease. We innovated the use of adjunct imaging to try to help us understand what were some of the differences between lesions and between patients. So the growth of intravascular ultrasound and other imaging techniques, quantitative angiography, other things that we began to use, clearly was one of the fundamental concepts that TCT tried to promote. We innovated what I think is a more scientific and evidence-based approach to how physicians think, not just to treat this as a surgical pseudo-subspecialty where it is a visceral or subjective impression about how things should be done, but to apply objective operator rigor to the process. How to analyze lesions, how to think about patients, how to analyze data, how to construct clinical trials, how to review those clinical trials and take the data back to impact clinical decision making. And then we began to move forward into the various eras of angioplasty that went beyond the multi-device era into the bare metal stent frenzy era, and then to the evolution of drug-eluting stents, and then beyond drug-eluting stents, looking well beyond the coronary circulation to endovascular, structural, neurovascular disease. TCT is a phenomenon, and it's a phenomenon that evolved over time. If TCT succeeds, then the field of interventional cardiovascular medicine should move forward. And what's unique about the meeting is you can almost feel that movement in the participation of the meeting. And you see certain things that are highlighted, certain things that evolve during the course of the meeting, where you get an impression of where the field is going and where you should be going as a participant in that field. TCT is uniquely interdisciplinary in the sense that we try to make this a safe haven and a familiar environment for all kinds of people: engineers, technologists, inventors, clinical scientists, industry participants, healthcare professionals that are non-physicians, nurses, technologists. So the networking opportunity at TCT is unique. You see everyone who's involved in this field from every perspective, and it allows you to meet people and to engage in conversations that could be very profound with regard to how the field develops. Much of what happens in the meeting is not within the meeting. It is in the back rooms, it is in the hallways, it's in the discussions in the evening that occur with different people that have never really interacted with each other, that bring varied experiences together to try to evolve new ideas. There are special moments and things that are surprises that occur during the meeting. I recall vividly when Antonio Colombo transmitted a very interesting case of directional atherectomy, and the patient happened to be an opera singer, so as part of the case, he actually serenaded the audience of TCT. It was an unusual, special moment at TCT that I think most people will remember who were there. But TCT has had a profound impact on us. From an academic standpoint, it serves as a punctuation point in the year. Much of the field really builds to a crescendo at TCT. So much new data, so many new first-in-man studies, so many new devices are exposed. It tends to serve the direction of our research efforts over the course of the next year. Much of the data presented at TCT, much of the techniques that are discussed at TCT, many of the operator strategies that evolve by consensus at TCT become part and parcel of how we practice interventional cardiology. We want the meeting to be spirited, emotional, innovative, to show not just what's here today, but what's possible in the future and what's visionary in the deep future. But TCT has grown from a 200-person to a 12,000-person meeting. And as a result of the growth, some of the intimacy and some of the special interactions that were easier 2 decades ago are much more difficult. So even though we've tried to retain that innovative, spirited edge to the meeting, in some respects, we've become a little bit more mainstream. in the way we present things to make it palatable to the larger audience that we serve. We try to embrace a much larger community that have new ideas in an effort to keep the content fresh. And every year we will do something different, something that is unusual. An example last year would be a course for cardiac surgeons in percutaneous intervention. It's never been done before. We had no idea if it would work. We felt that we needed to establish a closer camaraderie with our surgical colleagues, that surgical and endovascular therapy are now becoming fused. In many respects, we operate more like surgeons than internists, so it makes sense for embracing them as colleagues and to try to provide instruction for how they can become more empowered in their clinical therapies by gaining some of the catheter-based skills. It turned out to be very successful. This year we're building upon that theme to break out a much larger and more definitive series of opportunities for surgeons to gain more skills in that field. Similarly, we look forward to transitioning TCT into a bicoastal event and going to San Francisco next year. I think that will be another important moment for us. We have built upon the success of an international, global, live case transmission educational format, which is really an extension of our lineage of the earliest days of Grunzig and Hartzler with live cases, but taken to the extreme. This year, for instance, everything is going to be in high definition, because we think the clarity of the images does make a difference in terms of how you present the educational material. We think TCT has substantial additional growth potential. We believe that the extension of TCT, or transcatheter therapies, lesser invasive therapies, merging with imaging and merging with this multidisciplinary fervor that takes us out of the coronaries into other dimensions, is going to allow for substantial growth in the future. It's hard to predict exactly what that growth will be, because education with the internet may be changing in the future, and live courses and live meetings may evolve in different directions in the future. The success of TCT in the future will depend upon its constant focus on innovation, the uniqueness of having a live case venue and a live course where people can face-to-face connect and network, because that helps to drive some of the process of innovation and growth. We think that the global nature of TCT will continue to expand, so emerging markets in Latin America and Asia Pacific will become a focus for us in the future. We think many disciplines can contribute to TCT. Certainly those are areas that we can explore further. So we think TCT has substantial additional growth potential. TCT is a bundle of energy, a lot of excitement, many new things. In many respects, it's sensory overload within this subspecialty. I look forward to the excitement of the meeting. Every meeting is different, all the data is new. You never can anticipate a live case. I look forward to the camaraderie of re-engaging with a faculty of 800 or larger. I look forward to the interactions with the global community. I look forward to the imponderables, the unanticipated things that happen during the course of the meeting, and the challenge of trying to cope with those imponderables and interpret the data and try to provide a sounding board and perspective so that we can continue to evolve clinical practice and clinical research. Every year I am humbled and I am surprised that TCT has achieved the level of recognition and the level of interest and the level of involvement of so many different people. I'm shocked. I have this very limited sense of who we are and what we do, and the meeting has taken on such a larger scope and scale that it's hard for me to imagine that it's achieved this degree of recognition and of popularity. So I'm constantly daunted by the magnitude of the event, and I think it's that humbled sense that helps us to keep our perspective. We're a very energetic group, but I think we're constantly recognizing that for us to maintain that responsibility to try to service this community in a positive way, we have to not take too much time applauding our achievements, but by focusing on what we can do next to continue to evolve in positive ways.